Hello and welcome to this special edition of Octopus 101. My name is John Bristowe and I am a member of the team here at Octopus Deploy. Thank you for your time and attention joining us for today's webinar. This is a special edition of Octopus 101 because this is obviously our Halloween themed edition. I had this whole idea of being dressed up as a manual deployment, but it got really problematic because I'm only contained in here, so I didn't have enough room to make the Halloween costume really effective, but we'll go with overlays. So we've got a few overlays here that we can use for today's webinar. Anyways, if you've never attended a Octopus 101 before, welcome. This is a monthly series that we run to help folks like yourself get up to date, up to speed with what Octopus is all about. So if you've never seen Octopus before, if you've never used it, you've maybe heard of it, or maybe you've just downloaded a trial and you want to check out what it's all about, this is the webinar for you. So before we begin, I'd like to start by sharing with you a little bit of information about who we are and where you can find more information. If you go to octopus.com, you'll see a site that looks like this, and this is where you can download a free trial. You can either download a trial that you can install yourself, which we call Octopus Server, or you can sign up for a free instance of Octopus Cloud. Either way, it gives you an ability to kick the tires of Octopus and see what it's all about. And so if you go to a site like octopus.com or other subsites that we have, you can read and find out more information there. We have a lot of information to help you understand what we do and how we work and what we provide you for a solution for software deployments. To begin, I'd like to start by sharing with you some information about what you're going to learn in this webinar. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Octopus does, how it works, and more importantly, why you should consider using it for your software deployments. Oftentimes, people talk about technology and they don't highlight why you should be using a technology. They just kind of skip that over and just talk about what it does. So we're going to talk about the why. We'll talk about fundamental concepts like projects, deployment processes, releases. These and other terms you're going to hear throughout today's webinar, but don't worry, I'll explain them all in detail what they mean, and you'll have a solid understanding of how they work in tandem with other things in Octopus to help you do really robust deployments. We'll then show you how to create a deployment process from scratch. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about how you can trigger a deployment through a CI process or server. CI stands for continuous integration. It's the set of things that you'll do as part of a pipeline. These are things like tests and builds and things like that. And it's typically where a pipeline begins, but not always. But it is somewhere where a lot of developers are comfortable talking about where their pipeline begins. So we'll talk about how you can trigger a deployment from a CI process or server. And we'll use GitHub Actions as an example, but as you'll see, you can use Azure DevOps, you can use Jenkins, you can use BuildKite. There's a lot of different CI processes, servers that you can use for this process. And we'll talk about that in this webinar. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you that this is live. So if you happen to have a question, if you would like to submit a comment, let us know in the chat. We've got integrated chat with YouTube, with LinkedIn. We're streaming across all our social media properties. So let us know if you have any questions. Happy to answer them live here. And hopefully you'll get the answers you're looking for. So with that being said, let's go ahead and begin. When we think of a pipeline, we think of something like this, right? On the left, we have our developers. On the right, we have our targets where we want to ship our software to. And somewhere in the middle, a lot of stuff happens. Those things can include compilation, code building, etc. Where we like to see Octopus fit in this solution is typically right after you do your build. So where you have your source code, say in GitLab or GitHub or Jenkins or some repository there that's doing the build, etc. Right after that, you'll see Octopus Deploy fit within that space. And there's a good reason why we see ourselves there. And part of the motivation for building the product is because a lot of folks, when they get into this scenario, think of sort of DIY scripts, do it yourself type scripts. I'll do the deployment through a simple bash shell or something like that, and I'll just chuck it over the wall and away we go. The problem with that is it's often fraught with a lot of danger, with a lot of complexity and a lot of challenges. So deployment can get really gnarly if you don't have a safe and sane process to do it. And this is why you hear stories of like horror stories of like deploying on Friday, for example. And we're of the space or of the mindset that you should be able to deploy on not only Friday, but Saturday, Sunday. If you have a good deployment process, you should be able to deploy any day of the week, shouldn't matter. And you should be able to roll back if a change happens not to go through smoothly. And that's exactly what Octopus Deploy provides you, a safe and sane environment to do robust deployments with built-in patterns, with things like rollback, etc. And so without Octopus Deploy, as this chart obviously says, you've got all these scripts kind of communicating with each other. It can be hard to manage. It can be hard to obviously audit and get some sanity around this. And with Octopus Deploy, we quantify a lot of these things like a project or a deployment or a release or an artifact. These are obviously the building blocks of deployments. And with Octopus Deploy, you have one place where you can manage all of these things. And we give you clarity into all of this. Looking at a 50,000 foot view, where this might apply is, when you take a look at an organization where you have a lot of not only just source code, but you have environments as well, managing those things can get pretty hectic. So as we've got this on our homepage for a reason, because it articulates very well what typically happens inside a sort of development shop. You've got source code that comes in from any number of locations. Maybe you've got containers and images that come from remote feeds. You've got a whole bunch of environments that you have to manage. There's environment variables, there's scripts, etc. There's lots of things to contend with. There's a lot of custom code for things like observability, etc. And your targets can be hard to manage, and you get no visibility to what's actually being displayed there. And so with Octopus Deploy, we give you a way of not only integrating with that process, but also give you a great way to scale those deployments and make them easily available and reusable across your team. And so Octopus Deploy gets a lot of sanity around that chaos that can occur when doing a lot of DIY deployments. And so we do this in order to ensure that you do this in a way that's well understood, but also that's one that's fully audited, that gives you control and allows you to do so in a very robust way. Looking at an example here where, the example might be GitHub. So if you're utilizing GitHub or utilizing Microsoft solutions, this is where the rubber sort of hits the road. So you might have your code source inside of GitHub. You may be utilizing a combination of actions to do work against your source code, things like testing, things like that. You may have a bunch of container registries or artifact repositories from like GitHub, or from Docker Hub or from Artifactory, for example. You may want to pull those down in order to integrate those. Those can all be integrated within Octopus. And as it shows here, you can actually integrate with other tools as well, such as Slack, Teams, ServiceNow, etc. So you get full visibility across the entire pipeline. All right, that's enough talk. Let's get into a demo. I'm a big fan of demos, so let's go ahead and get into a demo here. So I've got an environment over here just to kind of showcase what Octopus looks like and how it works. So let me go ahead and just bring this full screen here so you get a better sense of what this looks like. All right, so what you're seeing here is the Octopus Deploy dashboard. This is basically where you go to manage projects, to manage your environments, to set up projects, to set up your deployment processes. And so the dashboard is really an at-a-glance experience. You can see really quickly the status of your project. So if we jump over to another instance here, this is one where I actually have a bunch of projects laid out. You get a sense here of what actually is happening. So you can see on the left-hand side here, I have all my projects. And then inside here across the top, I have my environments. So these are environments like development, test, staging, etc. And then inside here in this matrix, you can see all the various releases that have been successfully deployed, or in some cases not successfully deployed. And we give you visibility into each one of those deployments. So the dashboard is a really powerful mechanism for a lot of folks who want to get a sense of the status of their deployments. And that's the intent. It's basically to give you an at-a-glance experience so that you can get a sense of what these projects look like in terms of their deployment statuses. Now, jumping back to this environment here where I actually have a more simple example here. Let's jump into one of these examples here. So you can see I have, like, for example, like a website, for example. When you jump into a project's going to lay out along the left-hand side here a bunch of things that you can control. So there's things like your deployment process associated with this project. We have things like channels, which we won't get too deep into here. We have releases, we have triggers, we have all these sorts of things that associate the project and the deployment processes. So if we take a look at, for example, a deployment process is a series of steps that you do, or in this case, Octopus does, to deploy software. So when you think about deploying software, you often think of it as a coordination or orchestration of steps that occur to get software from a build process into a deployment target, such as Azure or GCP or even an IIS box, for example. And the series of steps that occur there can be a whole bunch of things. They can be things like, I need to notify my users that something's happening. I need to notify stakeholders that a deployment script is about to run. I may have to do database updates, etc. We have a feature inside of Octopus called Runbooks, which allows you to do operations tasks associated with a deployment. This is very frequent you see within a deployment process. So if we wanted to, we could actually go in here and modify the various steps inside of our deployment process. And out of the box, we provide you this really nice experience where you can drag and drop or utilize these steps that we have built in for constructing your deployment process. So deployment process is nothing more than a collection of steps that occur to do a deployment. And these steps are built in here. You can see some of the featured ones that we have here. So things like updating Argo CD application image tags, deploy a Helm chart, deploy Kubernetes YAML, run an Azure script, run a script itself. This is incidentally the most popular step we have. A lot of customers like to use this one. But these and other sorts of steps we have built in out of the box. And you can see here that they're all categorized by various things that we have here. So as you construct these deployment processes, you'll utilize these steps and build them together to construct this deployment process. And you can see here we have Azure, we have AWS steps, we have Azure steps, Google Cloud, etc. Now, if it so happens that you can't find a step that you want to utilize as part of your deployment process, don't worry. We actually have a whole series of steps that have been built by the community, over 573 steps that have been built by the community for a variety of scenarios. So these scenarios can include like, hey, I want to write a custom bash function, or let's say I want to integrate with CyberArk, or maybe I want to integrate with something else like Firebase from Google, or there's Google Cloud or GitLab. These and other steps have been built by the community, and they encompass step functionality that we didn't build out of the box, which is fine. And you can construct your deployment process out of these steps. Now, here you see we actually have a step that's already been executed. We have built-in validation here. So you can see I actually don't have any deployment targets set up, and that's a setting built into Octopus will verify whether or not a deployment process can occur ahead of time through a series of validations. But if we take a look at what this script actually does, you can see I can define this within in context here within my deployment process. So here I'm actually running a script. I have a variety of languages that I can target here if I so wish. So I can use PowerShell, Bash, C#, Python, etc. And I will, we give you a whole bunch of knobs and switches for you to control how this script step executes. This is consistent across the entire deployment process pipeline of Octopus. So in Octopus, you can define things like what environments you want this step to run within. This is very powerful, especially when you're thinking about things like a deployment pipeline for production. So you may want certain steps to run for production, but for everything else, like in QA or dev or test, that's okay. You can have those steps run, or vice versa. You can have the opposite occur. You can specify which steps run in certain environments. You can also have them skip certain environments, etc. So you have full control over how these things run, not only as part of the deployment authoring process, but also after the fact. You can control it after the fact when you execute these things. You can give it a series of run conditions as well. This is really powerful when you have subsequent steps like child steps. So you can say things like, hey, if the previous step didn't occur successfully, run this step, or opposite, only run this step if the previous one was successful. So you get a series of branches. You can run these steps in parallel. There's a whole bunch of things as well. You can incorporate retries. You may wonder, why would we have retries? Well, networks can be sometimes flaky. You get things like latency. And oftentimes when you're talking to remote systems, like say like a cloud provider, you may want to execute that step over again if it didn't succeed due to network latency. These things happen. And so we have built in things like retries, timeouts, etc. These and other sorts of features we have built in out of the box for each one of these steps. Now, if you take a look at other examples here, so we have some this is another instance that we have. We take a look at some more elaborate examples of defining a deployment process. You can see that these things can get pretty complicated, and that's fine. Like, this is your deployment process that defines a series of steps for shipping software. And this is intentional, right? We're providing you the building blocks for shipping software out of with Octopus. And so in this example here, the first thing that we do is we send a notification to Slack to let folks know, hey, we're doing a deployment. Then we go ahead and run a SQL script. We utilize a technology called Flyway. This is an awesome technology from Redgate. It's an open source technology that you can use for doing database migrations. We then do a manual intervention step. This is a special type of step that checks to see that a human gets involved. So this will stop or halt the execution of a deployment process and wait for someone to say, please proceed. And this is basically a sanity check. So you can wait for someone with appropriate rights to come along and say, yep, let's go ahead and do the deployment. And then we do other steps, and then we notify team of our success or failure after the fact. So you can see here that these steps can get really powerful, and you can get a lot of functionality built in out of the box with Octopus, which is great. And so coming back here to our project view, you can get a sense of how powerful this can start to get, right? So you can define these deployment processes, you can define your targets, you can define your environments, and then use these over and over again for doing deployments. So that includes things like operations and patterns, etc. So I talked a little bit about runbooks, for example. You can coordinate all of this stuff together and ensure that your deployments go safely and sanely. You can do things like rollbacks. So we automatically store and preserve the state of the 2 previous deployments that you've done, and those are what are called releases. So if you've done a release and it didn't succeed successfully, so if it didn't, execute successfully, you can actually roll back that deployment automatically, and will reinstate the state of the previous deployment as part of this process. So these and other things are great. This is like fantastic stuff, and this is really providing you a great experience for doing these deployments in a way that provides clarity around this stuff. So that's a very, very quick demo. Now, don't worry, we're going to come back to Octopus. I just wanted to give you a little bit exposure of what Octopus looks like. Remember that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions you have here. So just to summarize briefly what I showed you, if this is the first time you've seen Octopus, I'll just show you, just kind of highlight what we took a look at there. So you get a visual representation of your deployment process. This includes things like child steps. You can get parallel execution as well. And there's lots of stuff that you can do here. So just be aware that this is something that we provide. We have features in here like integrated markdown-based notes. This is really powerful because a lot of times when you use Octopus, you're using it in a team-like environment. So if you define a deployment process and you share this with other members of your team, you may want to articulate what these steps do. And so notes that provide that context are really helpful. We provide integration with parallel step execution. So you can obviously execute these steps in parallel, which is great. You can provide context there for that execution. And we also provide environment labels. So you can have certain steps run for certain environments. And this is really, really nice because if you think about how you might have to execute or how you might have to construct this with a sort of DIY approach, this would be very, very difficult. You'd have to have environment variables, if branches, etc. Out of the box, you just simply give it a label and away you go. This will execute only on staging, for example. And this is a really powerful way of constructing your deployment pipelines. Now, just to summarize some of the things that we've talked about here. So as I mentioned, we have built-in patterns within Octopus. So you can actually do your deployments in a reliable way. It's risk-free because we have built-in rollback capabilities. So if a deployment fails, and sometimes deployments do fail for a variety of reasons, you can easily roll those things back. That's built in as part of Octopus. So you can revert changes very quickly. We are the only release management tool that your operations team can also use. So what this means is, let's say there's a lot of operations you want to run, for example, like things like I want to maintain a database, I want to run upgrade scripts, or I want to maybe do a patch of a web server, or maybe I have to do some operations associated with a particular target. These and other types of things I can construct as a runbook, and I can give it all the associated necessary permissions, and then delegate rights to various members of my team to perform those operations either as part of a deployment or as part of a side task. Like, let's say, every week we do a maintenance on our QA lab, for example. You can quantify these as part of your Octopus instance as runbooks, and then execute them either as a daily task or as an emergency operation if so needed. If you're doing anything with Kubernetes, we have built-in support for things like YAML, Helm charts. We have a feature called Kubernetes Live Object Status, which shows you the state of your pods, etc., as they are running your execution of your deployments to Kubernetes, which is fantastic. We have built-in support, obviously, for a variety of Kubernetes-like things like Argo CD, which is brand new. So Argo CD support inside of Octopus is a thing, yes. We also have a really nice feature. This is something that a lot of folks use as they mature in their use of Octopus, called multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is a wonderful capability. It's actually one of the top-rated features that most of our customers cite when talking about Octopus. It's a feature that they love. And what it allows you to do is basically have a consistent development experience across a multitude of different targets that we call tenants. Tenants are basically the ways in which we quantify a type of target. It's not a particular instance of a target, like say this is an instance of Azure or this is an instance of like AWS or Google Cloud or IaaS, etc. Rather, it's a type of application user that we may want to deploy to. An example that we commonly cite is like, let's say I'm running a series of health pet clinics, for example, veterinarians across, say, the US, and I want to deploy a particular app version to, say, the eastern side of the US versus the western side of the US, or maybe I've got a series of ones for central US, I can actually quantify those as tenants, and then I can deploy to those different types of tenants. This is a really powerful capability of Octopus. It means that you don't have to change your application code. You can simply just qualify these as tenants and then do deployments to those tenants through Octopus. It's a really, really nice feature and is often cited by a lot of customers who use Octopus. Another built-in capability, of course, is the fact that when you're doing deployments with Octopus, you often want to trace when a deployment happened, who executed the deployment, things like that. That's called governance. That's called risk management. And compliance is a really, really important thing, especially as organizations grow and they do things like auditing. Octopus provides accountability across the board. So we trace every execution that occurs. We not only trace that, but we also integrate with scenarios that provide the similar functionality. So examples are like Jira Service Management or ServiceNow. These are examples where you can actually have these act as the arbiter for deployment. So you can actually utilize ServiceNow to approve a deployment, and then it will communicate with Octopus and then say, yep, go ahead and do the deployment. All of that is logged, all of that is traced, and it is a great experience for a lot of folks who care deeply about this. If they're doing any compliance checks, etc., this is built in out of the box, and we'll take a look at that in the next demo, which is now. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat. Happy to answer them. I'll just check here. No questions, which is great. Either everything is crystal clear or you guys are eating Halloween candy. Either way, that's fine. All right, so inside our instance here, you can see we have our projects, which we mentioned earlier. If we jump into this example here, so earlier we mentioned that this one didn't work properly. So you can see we've got this big red X here. There was an error. I can hover over this and I can see the deployment failed because of one or more steps failed. So let's drill into this and find out what happened. So if we take a look at this, you'll see that we get traceability into this. So in this case, it says here, failed to lease a worker. That's a thing that's built into Octopus. We have this concept called workers, which are basically these processes that perform work. That's why we're called workers. They perform work on your behalf. And there's a variety of reasons why these things occur. This could be just a setup capability here, but this gives you an example of what you see when you do a deployment. So here we've done a release and we've done a deployment of this particular application. It failed here, and you can see we get a trace of that failure occurring. You'll notice here also that we skipped a bunch of steps here because this was built into our deployment process. So this icon here denotes that we didn't perform this step, but we did notify, because we designed it this way, we did notify the team that a failure actually occurred, if that was one that we wanted to execute. We also get a running task log as well. So if I wanted to, I could drill into the verbose logs here of everything that occurs. So I get all the environment variables. I can see all the steps that occurred. I can get any trace logs that I may have executed as part of this. So you can see that we get true visibility into this this release as well. I can take a look at the history. I can see what actually executed this. So in this case, it was TeamCity that triggered this deployment. So we have a process in TeamCity that executed and then coordinated with Octopus to do this deployment. I can also take a look at changes if I wanted to. So any changes to the release itself. And then finally, we have this feature here called build information. If I wanted to have a compilation of notes that are based on the Git commits, what we call build information, I can integrate that within Octopus as well and utilize that for things like release notes, etc. It's a really powerful mechanism. We don't have that enabled here, but you get a sense of how this actually works. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see I have this feature called timeline. If I click on that, you can see we get a drill down of the deployments that have occurred for this particular project. So again, coming back to that point I made earlier about visibility, governance, traceability, etc. You can see we got a timeline here of both successful and not successful failures, deployments. And this happens, right? This is a typical server scenario. Most of the time it's green. Sometimes you get some red, which is fine. It's a bit of a Christmas theme, I guess. But this is to demonstrate here the visibility you have into a deployment process. So if things go wrong, that's fine. You can look into the logs and get a sense of why these things occurred. And so that's part of the timeline view there, which is great. Jumping back here to the dashboard, so we can see we get this at-a-glance experience here for the project as well, and I get that visibility across the board if I so wish, which is great. Let's talk a little bit about how these things actually get triggered from a pipeline. So let's assume, we've got Octopus set up, we're ready to go, we've set up our deployment processes. Now what? Typically, what happens is these things are triggered from a CI process. So if we jump over here, we have a repository we have available up on GitHub. It really doesn't matter what the source code does. What does matter is the integration level. So here we have a project folder here called .github/workflows. This is where your GitHub actions live. Workflows is .github is a hidden directory within GitHub. It's a well-known location, and /workflows is where GitHub will look to execute your workflows that utilize GitHub actions. So GitHub actions are a series of commandlets that you can run that will execute similar to a deployment process, and you'll utilize those to do things like build and test and things like that. So if we take a look at an example file here, the way that you construct your workflows is based on YAML. It's a your opinions may vary on whether or not YAML is a great environment, but there you go. And so you can see here this. If you haven't seen GitHub Actions in the raw here, that's fine. Basically, it's a text file that denotes a series of steps to execute. What matters here is the fact that we're utilizing integration with Octopus. So integration with Octopus we can perform these steps because we have a series of these actions defined within the GitHub Marketplace. So if you go to the GitHub Marketplace, which is at /marketplace, you'll see a page that looks like this. And this is where you can go and grab a series of GitHub actions to integrate within your deployment or within your build pipeline. And it's if you take a look here, if you search for Octopus, you'll notice that we have a bunch of actions built into the marketplace that you can use. So things like if you want to install the CLI, or you want to, say, push a package to Octopus Deploy. So Octopus Deploy has a built-in package repository. A package is what we think of is like a executable, like a DLL or an exe or a .o, like any sort of a deliverable, a tarball, things like that. These are like files that you use for doing a deployment, and they're typically archived, meaning they're typically zipped up. That's what we call a package. And Octopus has a built-in package repository that you can send packages to for deployments. So if you want to push a package as part of a CI process, we have actions to do that. You can create releases from CI. You can push build information. You can deploy releases. These and other sorts of steps you can execute as part of a GitHub action-based workflow. And so if we jump back into the YAML file that we have defined earlier, I'm just going to increase the font size here so you can see it a little bit better. This is what you'll typically see with like a .NET project. You'll see a lot of setup of .NET. You'll see a .NET command of the CLI executed. There's our build step there. So .NET build is basically utilizing a proj file, for example, for doing builds. But down here, after we've done all our builds, you'll see this is where we start to use the integration with Octopus Deploy through our GitHub Actions. So here we're creating a zip package, and then we're taking that and then uploading it to Octopus via the push package action that we have. So this is how we basically push our zip archives up to Octopus to use as part of a deployment. And then from there, we can do other things like create a release, we can deploy a release, etc. And so this is how we integrate within CI processes. We have integration with Azure DevOps, we have integration with TeamCity, we have integration with a variety of CI processes, which is fantastic. So it's important that you leverage this capability because this is basically how your deployments come to life from that perspective, which is something to think about. So, sorry, let me just go over to this view here so you can see a little bit better. All right, so if we jump back into our deployment instance here, another thing that we can do, which is, these are some of the side things that I'll mention, but again, this is just a 101, so it's meant to give you a cursory sort of knowledge of what Octopus does and how it looks. We have this section up here at the top left-hand corner. These are what we call spaces. Spaces are a way of neatly separating projects from each other. You can assign roles and permissions to spaces. It allows you to basically have a collection and separate concerns, which is great. And as I, jump from one space to the next, obviously I get a different view of what's actually occurring there. So I have these different spaces set up. We utilize this in our samples instance, which you can hit today. So if you go to samples.octopus.app, you can go to this instance and kick the tires yourself. You can take a look at the various spaces we have set up there for various patterns. So these are various patterns that you may want to implement, things like tenanted deployments, canary, blue-green, things like that, rollbacks, etc. So you can take a look at these yourself if you're so inclined, which is great. And as I said before, a lot of these will integrate as part of the Octopus experience. So you'll integrate, these integration points exist across a variety of CI processes. There's a whole bunch of other things I can show you as well, but this is just meant to be a very high level view of Octopus itself. So let me go ahead and take a moment and just jump back into our slides, and we'll just round out some of the things that I just want to highlight here for this webinar. So you saw a lot. There's a lot to this product. I'm hoping that it gives you a little bit of inspiration to take a look a little bit further into what Octopus is and why it works well for your deployments. We talked about some fundamental concepts. We talked about projects, talked about spaces, talked about deployment processes. These are the things, as you explore Octopus, things like tenants, runbooks, etc., you'll experience. And as you get to know the product, they'll become quite familiar. This is the way in which we quantify things as part of this. And so in this webinar, we talked about some of those fundamental concepts. Obviously, your journey starts today and continues on. You'll learn a little bit more about this as you go through this. We showed you how to create a deployment process, and we showed you how to trigger that deployment process through a CI process. So we took a look at how GitHub Actions will trigger these things through the various actions we have. Believe me, there's more. There's a lot more to this, but this is basically how these things hang together. The most important thing to mention here, obviously, is the fact that, as I said earlier, when you're utilizing a tool like Octopus Deploy, the reason why you use a tool like Octopus Deploy is because it gives you a lot of sanity around your deployments. A lot of developers, and I've been guilty of this myself, simply just chuck things over the wall and hope for the best when we do our deployments. That is not a great way to do deployments. You want to get a lot of sanity around this. You want to have traceability. You want to have governance. You want to have the ability to do rollbacks, etc. You want to be able to deploy on Friday. This is a great thing. You want to be able to have a safe and sane environment to do these things. If all of these sound great for you, then Octopus is definitely a tool that you can use for that intent. As I said before, this is a live webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them to the chat. In the meantime, I just want to highlight a few things here that are worth mentioning. We have a upcoming event called Shipped. So if you go to octopus.com/shipped, you'll see a site that looks like this. This is a 2-day event that will be running in December, just before Christmas. You're not doing anything around this time. This is typically a holiday season. So this is a great time for you to skill up on continuous deployment, Kubernetes, GitOps, etc. Feel free to register today. This is at octopus.com/shipped. We're going to have a lot of great content there. This is a virtual event. You can sit, it's free. You can sit and watch a bunch of great speakers talk about these things, including folks from Octopus. We'll do a lot of great sessions there. So make sure to check that out. We also have some upcoming webinars as well that you may want to take a look at. This is at octopus.com/webinars. You'll see a site that looks like this. This is the series that we're currently doing, our Octopus 101. This is our monthly series. We do these every month. We've got one coming up on December 12th, featuring myself, Bob, and Shipped. This is talking about platform gatekeeper problem, why shared responsibility beats control. This is going to be a bit of a conversation that will be interesting. Myself and Dan will be doing a webinar featuring KubeCon, stuff that we saw there. We also have a show called Argo Unpacked, which is available up on our YouTube channel for CodeFresh. Definitely worth checking out. All of this you'll find up on our website at octopus.com/webinars, which is fantastic. And if you missed anything during today's webinar, don't worry. It was all recorded. It's going to be available up on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe, as the kids say. You'll find us at youtube.com/Octopus Deploy. We have a bunch of videos featured there. We have a show called Deploy on Friday that we do every week. If you want to learn more about Octopus and you find out the latest information about what happened during the week, this is hosted by myself and others. We have videos from various members of the team talking about a variety of things. So if you want to find out more about continuous deployments, continuous delivery, etc., feel free to check out our YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/Octopus Deploy. Awesome. And don't forget, you can download a free trial of our software, which is at octopus.com. And you can download and install it, or you can utilize a cloud instance as part of this experience. One final resource I do want to point out is our roadmap. If you go to roadmap.octopus.com, you'll see a site that looks like this. This is essentially a rundown of the latest features that we have shipping all the time. We keep this constantly up to date. So you can see these are the features that we've recently shipped. We have a new feature called we have process templates, which are available as part of the Platform Hub, which is a great capability. You'll find it available within your instance, which is where are my instances? Sorry, two main instances. Platform Hub is a capability that you can enable for cloud instances. It allows you to qualify, allows you to define these process templates that you can use as part of your deployment processes, which is great. So that's something that we just shipped, for example. We just shipped also integration with Argo CD. So you'll find all of these things and more, including planned features, things that are under consideration up on our roadmap, which is at roadmap.octopus.com. As I like to tell people, make this your homepage, if not a bookmark. Let us know if you have any ideas for Octopus. You can submit your own ideas here, which is great. And you'll find more up on our roadmap page. Awesome. Well, there you have it, our Halloween edition of our Octopus 101. Don't forget, we run these every month, so we'll have one planned for next month. Stay tuned for this up on octopus.com/webinars. And if you have any questions whatsoever at any time, feel free to submit an email to either myself or to various folks on the team. This is my email address here. We'd love to hear from you. We have a support group. We have a Slack channel that you can check out as well. You'll find all of this up on our website, which is at octopus.com. So feel free to take advantage of that going forward, which is great. Awesome. Thank you for your time and attention. This is meant to be short and sweet. Hopefully you got something out of this. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy Halloween, everyone. We'll see you on the next one. And take care. And don't eat too much Halloween candy. All right. See ya.